Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition it's Joe and Mac, brought to us by Data East. A port of the arcade classic, Joe and Mac on the NES was created by Elite Systems. This would be the only version of Joe and Mac they ended up creating for home consoles, and it happens to be one of the weakest versions available for Joe and Mac. While still keeping the core gameplay of playing as one or two cavemen as they tried to save the village females from some evil cavemen taking out all kinds of different cavemen and dinosaurs along the way, the game itself gets a little bit tough at times. The controls aren't nearly as fluid as other versions of the game, and of course being on the NES has a little bit of a downgrading in the graphics department. So here we go with Joe and Mac for the NES. Like I mentioned before, you can play the game one or two player, hitting select at the main menu in order to go to the option screen, and then when you press start, you jump right into the main game. You can see right from the start, while not nearly as colorful or graphical, of course, as the arcade or even Super Nintendo versions of the game, Elite Systems did a decent job of bringing the game to the NES, with some good backgrounds, good colors, and some overall pretty decent sprite work. There's a total of 5 different levels in the game, and each level is broken up into 2 parts. After you make it to the end of one part, you end up battling a big boss, and then you move on to the second half of that level where, at the end, you fight another boss. Here is our first boss of the game. This large T-Rex, though not nearly as large as some of the other dinosaurs we're going to be seeing throughout the game, can be a little intimidating at first. He starts walking towards you and he launches out some rocks from his mouth that come at you. You can easily jump in between the rocks to avoid getting hit, and what you'll have to do is time your jumps and throws correctly in order to hit the dinosaur directly in the mouth. Once you hit him, he ends up backing up. Now, if you're able to, you can get him into the left corner here, and if you time your jumps and hits correctly, you can keep hitting him over and over again, and he won't be able to get any more rocks out. Once you're able to defeat him, though, you do a little celebration and move on to the second half of level number 1. There's a decent amount of variety of different types of enemies. You have the normal cavemen enemy that come at you either in a standard form that walk pretty slowly towards you, taking a few hits to get rid of them, or you'll have ones with big eggs on their back, and by defeating them you'll get new weapons. You also have ones that'll come running straight at you, and you'll have to either avoid them altogether by jumping over them, or attacking them quickly. And then you even have cavemen riding in vehicles, like the one we saw just a bit ago, dropping bombs from the sky. The weapon I ended up getting is the wheel weapon, which is my favorite weapon in the game and the most effective, though I will be using some of the other weapons throughout the run as well. When you make it to this boss, you'll find that it's almost impossible to hit him from standing on the ground. What you'll have to do is master the big jump. By holding up and pressing jump, you'll fly up into the air really high, and by doing so you also bypass some of the limitations on weapon throwing. When you jump up and do the double jump really high into the air, you can launch out more weapons more quickly than just doing a standard normal jump or standing on the ground. This allows you to hit the bosses really easily. For the first boss, as you saw though, just doing those big jumps and keep throwing wheels at him, we drain his health really fast and move on to level 2. Don't worry though, we'll have a rematch against this guy later in the game, so I'll have a little bit more detail for strategies here. Another thing you can do with your weapons, which ends up being really cool, is you can throw weapons straight up into the air to hit enemies just above you, or you can hold in the attack, charge up, and launch the weapon out for either more damage or farther distance. Be careful though while charging up though, if you charge for too long, you end up getting overexhausted and you end up losing a good chunk of health. One of the worst enemies in the game are the sitting plant enemies. These little guys are very annoying. They stand on platforms waving back and forth, having a good hitbox. They also launch projectiles at you. You'll run into these guys throughout the game as well, especially during this giant plant boss battle. Having the wheel here instead of some of the other weapons is really crucial to help drain the health of the giant plant easy. If you get too close to the giant plant, you'll end up getting eaten and instantly killed, so you'll have to keep your distance, and you'll have to deal with a pterodactyl flying overhead, as well as 2 little plants on the ground. Standing on the ground between the 2 plants will allow you to avoid some of the damage from the projectiles and the pterodactyl. Do the big jump up in the air so you can launch out lots of wheels, and you shouldn't have too much trouble. Then you move on to the second half. This introduces some slopes to the game that also have some falling rocks, so you'll have to jump over them. There's also some more weapons besides just, well, the axe as well as the wheel. The other weapons include the boomerang, which we'll be getting later, as well as kind of a spike, which I feel is the weakest weapon in the game. Now it's time for the next boss. This large pterodactyl has of course a few mini pterodactyls with him. Hitting him can be a little bit difficult because you'll have to hit him directly in the face in order to do damage. Standing on the ground you can sometimes hold up in order to attack him, but the best way is definitely doing the big high jump and throwing weapons at him that way. He has a few different types of patterns, either standing still for a second and then swooping down, or just going straight across the entire screen. He never comes from the left side though, he always comes from the right, so that'll at least help you out, so you'll know always where he's coming from. After defeating him though, we save another one of the village girls and move on to level number 3. Like I mentioned in the previous level about the spike weapon, this weapon is the worst weapon in the game as it throws a spike straight out. Charging it up will allow you to throw it a little bit farther, as well as it'll allow you to do a little bit more damage, but this takes so much time that hitting enemies with it ends up being a real chore, so I do not recommend picking up that weapon. Unless there's some hidden ability with it that I don't know about, I say that's the weakest weapon. However, the boomerang is a pretty decent weapon overall, having some decent strength, as well as being able to charge it up pretty easily. The only problem with the boomerang is you can only have 2 on screen at once. This will unfortunately sometimes not allow you to attack every time you want to. The next giant dinosaur boss battle will once again also come at you from the right side. He has a couple of different patterns as well, coming either straight at you and then stopping, launching some fireballs from his mouth, or he'll just move quickly across the entire screen on the bottom, or he'll stay still for a second and then come down to the bottom part of the screen. Thankfully, you should have a decent amount of health at this point, and doing some big jumps up into the air and launching the boomerang or whatever weapon you have at about the top of his eye is where you'll be able to do a decent amount of damage. This is also one of those fights where it's kind of hard to actually avoid taking at least some damage, so hopefully you came in with at least half your health. Once he's taken care of though, we move on to the second half of level number 3. The second half of level number 3 is a pretty simple area. You'll start off with some rocks immediately rolling towards you, so be sure to have your weapon ready to take those out or easily jump over them. Be careful though, you don't accidentally pick up an unwanted weapon when you take out the guy with the egg on his back during the segment. After running along the top for the most part, you'll then have to make a small platform jump over a gap before continuing on. Here you'll have another opportunity for another weapon in the level. Unfortunately, it always seems when I have the boomerang in my possession, I can't get the wheel back. Next up is the third level final boss, and this guy is one of the easiest bosses in the game. He doesn't move at all, and just consistently keeps firing out rocks. The pterodactyls he has with him are more annoying than him himself. Just do the little short normal jumps and keep firing boomerangs or whatever weapon you have directly into his mouth, and you'll hit him over and over again, just draining his health. It'll take a little bit of course, since it takes usually 2 hits with a weapon to take down 1 piece of his health, but since this fight's so easy, you shouldn't have any trouble. With level 3 complete, of course, we move on to level 4, which starts off with a caveman running directly towards you. This level I like to call the rematch level, as we have a rematch starting off against the T-Rex from the first level of the game. Introduced here, though, are new cavemen who can throw some rocks at you, but they do so pretty slowly, so you should be able to sneak up on them, hit them a couple times to get rid of them, before they're able to even get 1 or maybe 2 rocks out at most. The level is really short though before we end up running into the next boss, the rematch against the T-Rex. This guy will not back up when you hit him in the mouth. He has pterodactyls with him and throws out usually 3 rocks at a time instead of 2. However, there's still a decent strategy of taking him out. When he's backing up, he won't actually fire any rocks at you, so that helps. What you'll have to do though is get underneath of him just below his mouth, then walk along with him, slowly firing boomerangs or whatever weapon you have up into the air. If you time it correctly, you'll be able to keep moving and he won't bump into you, at least not multiple times, maybe once near the very end of his cycle. Repeat this process over and over again and you should be able to take this guy out. He can be pretty tough and intimidating without knowing that you can stand underneath of him and with correct timing be able to hit him without him hitting you. You then move on to the second half of level number 4, and this leads to another rematch, this time a rematch against the large pterodactyl we fought earlier on in the game. This also introduces a new enemy you'll be seeing through the last 3 parts of the game. These guys come at you 2 at a time every time. You're usually only going to have to dodge the bottom of the 2. You can do big jumps to go over both of them, and sometimes you can actually duck underneath the bottom one to avoid getting hit that way, but these guys are going to be constantly come at you from here on out. When you make it to the end of the area though, it's time for the rematch against the pterodactyl. He has usually 2 pterodactyls with him at all times instead of just 1 here, and he moves a lot quicker. So because of that, you'll have to have a little bit better timing with your hits during this fight, though the main strategy is going to remain of you jumping, doing the high jump up into the air, hitting him when he shows up on screen, and then avoiding him as he runs and dashes across the screen. Of course, just like before, he can only come out from the right side of the screen, which will definitely help you out. This is one of the longest and toughest fights for me in the game, mainly because it will take a while to drain all his health. Sometimes you'll be able to fire boomerangs or weapons up in the air from the ground if you get underneath of him at the right point. Once he's taken care of though, we move on to level 5, the final level of the game. Level number 5 starts off with another one of the rematches against a previous boss. This also has a ton of those flying guys coming at us non-stop, but thankfully the ground is pretty solid and straight, so you should be able to get a good jump on the enemies, being able to duck under ones or being the high jump over the other ones to avoid them. You will find a caveman here that will give you a weapon, but be careful not to take a weapon you don't necessarily want, especially this late in the game. After getting past a ton of those flying guys, it's time for the rematch against the large T-Rex. This guy fires out multiple rocks as well as he has a pterodactyl with him as well. He consistently keeps opening his mouth firing rocks. Do the high jump up into the air in order to actually hit him with your weapon. Standing pretty close to him, you should be able to avoid most of the rocks, as well be able to get lots of hits in with every jump that you do. The pterodactyls also pretty much avoid attacking you near the close area of him, except for the ones that will kind of swoop down in a C pattern. But if you time it correctly with your high jumps, you'll easily jump over the ones that come actually towards you and keep attacking the giant dinosaur. Once he's done though, we move on to the second half of level 5 and the final part of the game. Thankfully, the final boss of the game isn't a rematch. This area has a pretty weird bottom of the constantly scrolling area here. You'll also have pretty much another flat surface type area where you're going to be avoiding tons of the flying guys. Since the final boss of the game is actually pretty tough, you'll want to conserve as much of your health as possible, though that's going to be really tough with all the rocks rolling towards you, the caveman enemies, and of course the flying guys. When you make it to the end though, it's time to battle the final guy himself. This giant half-breed of dinosaur and caveman can be quite vicious. He fires out rocks from his mouth that end up turning into little bugs that move around. He can jump all the way across the screen multiple times, as well as he'll also come at you standing still for a few seconds and then slowly jump a little bit towards you, fire a shot, then move even closer to you until he goes off screen. When he does his big jumps up into the air though, you can actually duck underneath of him. This ends up being very helpful because even though it looks like he'll end up landing on you, his hitbox isn't as bad as you think it would be. For attacking him though and avoiding all the birds, it can be a real challenge, doing the big giant high jumps in best you can in order to hit him at least with one boomerang every time you jump into the air. Trying to link together multiple hits can be difficult, but the best way to do it is hit him once on the way up and once on the way down. Like I said, the timing will of course take time to get used to, but if you're able to master it, you should be able to take away one piece of health with every big jump. Like I said before, when he does his big jumps across there, be sure to duck underneath of him so you can avoid him landing on you. Once you deliver the final hit though, you can sit back and enjoy the ending to Joe and Mac on the NES. So, there you have your ending. It just says, "Congratulations, Joe," and Joe runs. Just constantly runs, with the village girls following behind. We can get one last shot of one of the cavemen laughing, before we get to the main entry screen. Joe and Mac is actually one of my favorite action platformers, but mainly from the arcade and the Super Nintendo version, as well as its Super Nintendo only sequel, Joe and Mac 2. There's actually another game in the series as well that isn't officially a Joe and Mac game, but in Europe and Japan, it was called Joe and Mac 2. It's kind of weird, and we'll get into that in another video. But for now, that's going to wrap up this edition of Play It Through. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.